Greetings, my name is Christopher Ricker, New York City Parks Environmental Educator here in the Greenbelt, and today I want to welcome you all to our Greenbelt at Home Nature Bite. During this lesson, we're going to explore the ways that you can learn how to identify and read animal signs so that as you're exploring parks here in New York City, your backyard, and other natural areas, you too can learn how to read the landscape and understand the story that wildlife leave behind. Many visitors might have experienced seeing animal tracks on the ground and asked themselves, what kind of animal is this? In order to gain the skills to become a competent tracker, we have to ask ourselves a lot of questions. We have to ask ourselves, after seeing a sign, was this animal running? Was it walking? Was it gathering food? Maybe it was rearing young. As we gather and ask these questions, we can help to create a hypothesis. And then with a little bit of evidence, we too can understand and identify signs that animals leave behind. You might be asking yourself, what is animal tracking? Well, animal tracking is the ability to gather evidence of local wildlife by using tracks, scat, and other animal signs. It's then afterwards, when gathering these clues, we can begin to interpret animal behavior and locate wildlife within their environment. What is a track? A track is the impression of an animal's foot after it walks in any sort of soft substrate. This substrate could be sand, mud, silt, and even snow. When we look at this image, we can see that animals sometimes leave different prints. This print is from a raccoon, and on this print we can see the heel pad, the metacarpal pad, toes, claws, and the negative space between their metacarpal pad and their toes. By learning different footprints and tracks, you can learn how to identify different animals. Sometimes tracks aren't easily found in ideal conditions. So what are some other ways we can gather evidence? Well, we can look for browsing, homes, feathers, hair, carrion, blood, food cache, odors, and even urine. One of the most abundant and easily recognizable animal tracks here in the Greenbelt and around Staten Island belong to white-tailed deer. White-tailed deer hoof tracks generally have two hoof toes, which are up in this part, and two dew claws, which are these small little spiked imprints at the back of the hoof. The hoof makes a sort of reversed heart shape. If we're looking at the track itself, the outer wall of the track is slightly convex or straight, while the inner wall is usually straight or slightly concaved. Deer hoof prints are symmetrical, with the hind tracks being slightly larger than the front tracks. The front track of a white-tailed deer hoof is generally between 1.5 inches to 3 inches in length, with the width being about 1.5 inches to 2.5 inches wide. When we're looking at hoof tracks, we can see that sometimes the toes are really close together, while other times they're splayed out further apart. A deer that's moving at a faster rate is going to have its toes splayed further apart than a deer that's taking a leisurely strut through the park. You might be asking yourself, what if there are no tracks? And the truth is, when we're out in the field tracking animals, we're not always going to find a clear and clean track. And so that's why we have to utilize different signs and ask ourselves different questions as we're moving through different habitats. Just now we were coming along this trail and we noticed a bald spot in the center of the leaf litter. That made us stop. We began investigating and asking ourselves questions. We were asking ourselves, what are some of the animals that live in this area? What would be the need for scraping up some leaf litter and substrate? After that, we got a little bit closer and started moving leaves around to see what we might come across within this area. It's obvious that an animal was using its feet to scrape up and move the leaf litter. And when we moved these leaves back, we found these 2 drag marks. And so I was asking myself, what larger animal lives in the greenbelt and might be scratching up the substrate? And so by looking at this, I can tell that an ungulate, something with a hoof, as we discussed before with identifying deer tracks, had been scraping up the earth. Within here we have a little bit of frost that just broke off in between the 2 toes, so we know it's a rather fresh site. Also in here we notice that there is a little bit of a different footprint, a different pattern that looks like it's the bottom of a sneaker. So we know that a person walked through this area shortly after a deer was scraping up the substrate. After looking at this particular site, we started looking around the area itself to see what other signs we might find. We looked over on these trees and we noticed that on the backside, something happened to the bark here. Can you all guess what might have gone on here? So we know that there's deer in the area. And we know that bucks, which are male deers, grow antlers, and certain times of year they form velvet on those antlers, which becomes really itchy, similar to a scab that you might get on your hand after playing outside. And so these bucks walk over and they start rubbing those antlers very aggressively, trying to get that itch off. And in doing so, they leave a lot of scrapes, scratches behind on the trees. Sometimes the trees will heal up and survive. Very young saplings may not survive being rubbed on, but we can tell that this is a fresher rub in compared to maybe some other trees around here that have been rubbed in the past. And just like that, we're able to explore and read signs telling us that there are definitely deer in this area. Yet another way you can learn about what animals might be living in your area is by looking at scat. And yes, I'm talking about poop. Poop can tell us a lot about what an animal's eating, what it's doing, what its territory is. And so here we found some scat. So I know it's deer scat because it is round and pellety. And I have some darker deer scat down over here, which looks a little bit fresher. So again, we know it's deer because of the size. Something like a rabbit would have slightly smaller pellets in their scat. And we know it's not something like a coyote or a raccoon because it's not elongated and log-like. Over here, we have some other scat. It is deer scat, but it's a little bit older. We can see that it's breaking down a little bit. It's lost that dark, rich color that the other scat had. Identifying scat is not always easy because sometimes we come across scat that has broken down, has decomposed a little bit more. Maybe there was more insects that got into it earlier on. But by exploring scat, we can learn more about the biodiversity around us. As the seasons change, it can become more challenging to look for wildlife sign. But one sign in particular that I'm looking for when I'm coming out here along this trail is I'm looking for deer browsing. And so over here, if you can check out this really gnarly, spiky looking Greenbriar, right? This looks like something that we would probably want to stay really far away from. But deer looking for food during the winter months are munching on all of these Greenbriars here along the trail side. And so I know that just looking at the top of this, that some deer have come over, gotten some greens, and moved along. And this entire section here is just full of deer browse. During the spring and summer months, when there's other leaves out on the trees, browsing might look a little bit different, but this is a clear telltale sign that there's deer browsing in winter. Whenever you're walking out along trails, As someone interested in learning more about animal tracking, we're always looking for different signs to tell us a story about what's happening out in our natural area. Sometimes we find signs of humans, sometimes of wildlife, and sometimes of domestic animals. But all of these signs together tell a story, and that's why as a tracker, we're always looking for more information. As I'm walking along the trail today, I found some lightly sort of white blonde hair. I know that this hair probably belongs to a dog, that someone was walking out here in the park today. But again, that's another sign that we can be looking for as we're out looking for signs of wildlife, because if our domestic animals like dogs on a walk leave hair behind, sometimes wildlife such as birds might leave feathers, deer might leave tufts of hair. Sometimes animal carrion can have things left behind as well. So every sign that we find out here in the park is telling us a story about what's going on around us. Being able to identify animal tracks and animal sign is only one part of understanding animal tracking. In order to become a better and more competent tracker, you also have to understand habitat, specifically how any given organism may live and thrive within their specific habitat. Habitat includes water, food, shelter, and space. Understanding these specific components of habitat will assist you in finding animal sign, because all organisms need these essential components to survive. Wow, I don't know about you, but I had an amazing time learning all about animal tracking and reading signs here in the Greenbelt, and I hope that you enjoyed our time together too. As you go out and explore different natural areas around here or where you're from, start looking for those same animal signs and asking those same questions so that you too can gain a better understanding of the environment and biodiversity that lives around you.
Thank you so much for joining us for today's Greenbelt at Home virtual program. If you're interested in more content just like this, be sure to visit our YouTube channel at the Staten Island Greenbelt. We can also be found on Facebook at the Greenbelt Conservancy and Greenbelt Environmental Education pages, on Instagram at SI Greenbelt, as well as on our website at sigreenbelt.org. We work really hard to create content for everyone, and we can't wait to see you either out on these trails or right there where you are enjoying Greenbelt at home.